my name's Jocelyn and I'm one of the laboratory facilitators here at Douglas College, and I'm going to be showing you today how to prepare samples to be sent to the laboratory for testing. So I have all of my supplies here other than my patient's sample. There's a couple things that I want to mention. So for preparing for the lab, you want to make sure that you have all your supplies ready to go. So we're going to be using the centrifuge today. I have my lab bag that I'll be sending it with, along with a prepared lab requisition form. I also have some slides ready to go. These are labeled with the patient first and last name, the signalment. So I have canine, female spayed, Labrador Retriever, 7 years old, today's date that the sample was taken, and then my initials in the corner. I'm going to be preparing 2 blood slides, so I have 2 slides ready to go. I have my slide holder, again, prepared the same and labeled correctly with the patient name, signalment, date of collection, and my initials. And then I'm going to be collecting for a CBC and a chemistry. So this means that I'm going to be needing 2 types of tubes. For the tubes that I will be using, I'm going to be using an EDTA tube for the CBC portion, as well as a serum separator tube for the chemistry portion. It's very important that you properly label your tubes. So I have first and last name of our patient, the signalment again, the date of collection, the time of collection, so I have 9 a.m., and then my initials. So both of these are labeled the same for both the EDTA and the serum separator tube. And the other thing that's important to note in regards to the tubes that we'll be using is the expiration date on the tube. We want to make sure that we are not placing samples into expired tubes. So you need to check the expiry date, which is on the label for each tube. And I'm checking for both the serum and the EDTA, and both of these tubes are in date, so they're okay for use. The reason why we don't want to use expired tubes is because they can contain additives inside the tube. So for example, EDTA contains that anticoagulant additive. If that tube is expired, it can actually affect the results or the quality assurance for the sample and the patient. As well as older tubes actually lose their vacuum seal inside the tube, which can affect how you can place the tube or the sample into the tube efficiently. So I have both of my tubes for my CBC and my chemistry ready to go. They are labeled. I've checked the expiration date. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go collect my blood sample from my patient so it's ready to go, so I'll be right back. So I've collected my blood sample from my patient and I'm going to fill up my serum separator tube first. So I'm going to remove the needle, making sure that my cap does not touch anywhere, and I'm going to start filling up the tube. Serum sample. Place the cap back on, and then I'm going to fill up my EDTA tube, again making sure that the top doesn't touch anywhere on the table. And then for the EDTA tube, because this is your tube with anticoagulant in it, we don't want that tube to contain any clots. So it's really important that after you've placed that sample into the tube, you're gently rotating it back and forth, similar to a rocker some clinics have, and you want to do this about 10 times. After I've done that, I also want to hold it up to the light, and I'm going to gently roll it back and forth in the tube and make sure that I'm not seeing any micro clots or large clots in the sample. If you do see clots, you do need to recollect the sample and replace into the tube, because this will affect your results and can give you low results for some things that we're looking for the hematology sample. At Douglas College, sometimes because students take a little bit longer when they're learning to collect samples, the gold standard is to fill up your serum separator tube first and then your EDTA. However, I would like to note that sometimes at the college, your instructors will advise you to fill your EDTA sample first and then do your serum separator tube, because the serum separator tube can clot. So we aren't worried about the sample clotting, because that's actually what we want for this tube. So now that we have our samples in our tubes, we need to let the serum separator tube sit and clot for approximately 10 minutes before we place it into the centrifuge. So I'm just going to place it into my slide holder, and I'm just going to let it sit and clot. In regards to the EDTA tube, we're going to place this in the fridge Samples prior to going to the lab can be placed in the fridge, and then when we're ready to send them to lab, you can take an ice pack. You can take those samples on the ice pack and then send it out to the lab for appropriate testing. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it in the fridge, and then we'll be back after the 10 minutes to run it in the centrifuge. There is a second method in regards to placing your samples into the tube, and I'm going to show you that now. So I'm going to show you going into the serum tube without removing the top of your tube. This is going to keep the vacuum in place, but we will have to switch the needle. So I'm just going to go grab my blood sample from my patient, and I'm going to put it in the tube, and I'll show you how to do that. So I've collected my blood sample from my patient, and I have the existing needle that I collected from my patient. I'm going to remove this needle, and I need to place a fresh needle onto my syringe. And the reason is because there's tiny blood cells that go in amongst the inside of the needle, and those can dry along the side of the needle. And so we want to place a fresh needle onto our syringe prior to going into the tube so that we don't risk hemolysis of the cells. And I'm just going to place the tube, and as you can see, I'm not even touching the plunger, but there's that natural vacuum that's occurring, and it's actually taking the sample into the tube by that natural vacuum. So as you can see, you just want to kind of let it naturally flow, and then you can gently press if you find that the vacuum stops, but you don't want to do it too hard because again, you risk hemolysis of the sample. And that is the second method for filling your tubes. So you can fill it by taking the top off, or you can change the needle to a fresh needle and then place it directly into the tube, letting the vacuum do its thing in regards to placing the sample in the tube, and then you're ready to go. And then I'm just gonna let this sample sit for 10 minutes to clot before I place it in the centrifuge. So we have a little bit of blood left for making our blood slides. So I'm just gonna take the needle off with my syringe, and I have my hematocrit tubes that I've just grabbed as well. And so I'm going to prepare my slides. And like I said, we're gonna send 2 to the lab. So I'm just getting my hematocrit tube all prepared. And I have my 2 slides here. So you're going to make your blood smears as shown in your other courses. And then that slide needs to dry before we place it in the slide holder. So I'm gonna do that, but it's actually time now because it's been 10 minutes for us to run our serum separator tube in the centrifuge. So here is our centrifuge here. When you are centrifuging your serum separator tubes, you are going to run it at 5,000 RPMs for 10 minutes. So here at the college, we have these labels here to help you. However, it's important for you to verbalize the 5,000 RPMs and the time, which is 10 minutes. So I have it set to the blood here, again, 5,000 RPMs. I'm going to grab my samples that I collected. So I actually have 2 serum samples here that I can use to balance each other out. And as you can see in the tubing here, they have equal volume, which means that they're going to balance properly in the centrifuge and not risk damage to the centrifuge. So if we can have the camera person just over top here, I'm going to place my first sample here, and then that second tube needs to go directly across, again to balance that centrifuge as a whole. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lock the centrifuge. I'm going to turn it on, double check that I am at that 5,000 RPM, and then I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes, and I'm going to let that sample spin. And then we'll be back after 10 minutes and I'll show you how to package it for shipping. So the centrifuge has just dinged and it's ready to go with our serum separator tube. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna unlock the centrifuge, and I'm going to remove my samples gently from the centrifuge. And this is for another patient, so I'm just gonna set it aside. And then this is just double checking for fluffy, so I have it spun. So I'm gonna place the serum separator tube in my lab bag because it's ready to go. And then I just grabbed my EDTA or my CBC tube from the fridge, so it is also ready to go into the lab testing bag. And then my blood slides have dried and they're ready to go. So I have my pre-labeled slide holder, and I'm just going to gently insert these slides in here. I'm going to place them into my lab bag as well. Make sure that everything's snapped closed. I have filled out the requisition form for a general panel, which is the CBC and chemistry portion, and I'm going to place that in the bag. And then once again, this is going to go in the fridge until we're ready to send it to the lab. At that time, we're going to grab an ice pack. Those samples will go on the ice pack and they'll be sent to the lab for testing. And that is how you prepare a sample to be sent to the lab.